DayZ Frostline has been out for just over a month now, but was this DLC from DayZ a success both in sales and reception? DayZ Frostline, in the first week alone on its launch, sold over 300,000 copies. And October 20th marked its busiest day so far, with DayZ picking at 501,000 plus total active users, 235,000 on Steam, 113 plus thousand on PlayStation, 152,000 on Xbox. These numbers are amazing for a game coming out with a new DLC that's over 10 plus years old.
Community seems to be very receptive to the new DLC. Now there are some mixed comments about certain things, but we can talk about all of that later. But overall, I'm noticing positivity starting to come out of stuff as the dust has settled from the other issues that have happened. Um, for me, as a Bambi, a brand new player, I've only played Frostline a little bit. It was a lot of fun. I didn't really have any issues. Well, the issues I did have were my own issues, relearning how to do certain things that are needed in the Frostline map because you like fire, for example. I had to relearn how to do all that because you need that now. Whereas you don't as much need it before. But the one thing I did really notice that makes me think that the community is more positive about this is the experience from the randoms that I met in the game. Those people were so much nicer than the people that I've run into in the previous DayZ maps.
One thing I noticed that really struck me was around the marketing approach that Bohemia Interactive took with Frostline and engaging in the community. So they not only had a physical on-site event with some content creators that brought them out to BI headquarters, and they went out into the woods to some real-life DayZ locations and allowed them to shoot some content relating to that. But also there was uh, an event prior to the official release of Frostline where content creators got access keys and were able to download the game, install it. It was a previous build to what was original or officially released, um, and play it and stream it. And that created a bunch of really good gameplay content out in the streaming communities on YouTube prior to the release. So that really built a lot of excitement and got the hype train going.
Honestly, the honeymoon phase has ended and I'm still enjoying the map. Now, I notice some more things nowadays. I'm no longer wrapped up in the storytelling or the freshness of it now, but there are things that I notice nowadays, like the map blending isn't perfect in some places, but they are improving upon that with some of the fixes. But overall, I think this is a solid map. It is harder, it is harsher, but it's a lot more rewarding.
I haven't gotten a chance to explore a lot of the map yet because I die so often.
Ah,
But
maybe.
it is it is a lot more harsh, like you were saying, but it looks good. It to me, it looks great. I like to see the change of the way it looks versus the other maps. It doesn't feel like I'm playing Livonia again with different buildings and orientated a different way. I feel like I'm in a brand new map and looking out to the lakes, the oceans, the water, and seeing these big chunks of ice just floating along the shoreline is super cool to me. That's one of the details that I first noticed when I loaded up and appreciated right away.
They did have a lot of hints at lore that maybe we'll be hearing more about in the future. They did include some new building assets, as well as some reworked old building assets, so that when you go to loot, you don't just follow the old loot patterns that you've learned over the years in DayZ. They've moved some things around. They look a little bit more like they had been lived in, and people had to leave it in a hurry. So I thought overall, other than the fact I'm not a big fan of the cold weather maps, I thought that this was a needed and appreciated release to the DayZ.
And one of the things that I admire about this DLC and DayZ Frostline overall is they also included 1.26 alongside with it. So even if you don't buy the DLC, you get a lot of the features that came with DayZ Frostline that were like integrated into that map. You know, the bitter cold, the new comfort system, being able to have 3 plus symbols, even just the food being frozen and getting hot. Like all of these features were given to the base players who own the game.
So, Dumpy, bring up the food. Is it vanilla now that eating different temperature food affects you? Because this is a conversation I know at least me and you have had with multiple different people. Some of whom swear that's vanilla, and some of whom swear that was a mod.
I'm confirming it here, folks. Before 1.26, eating hot food would not hurt you unless it was modded in on PC. Since 1.26 came out, eating hot food will hurt you. I haven't looked at the numbers yet, but trust me, you don't want to be doing it when you're flashing red health.
Other big thing that was added into 126 was improvement and maturation of the weather system. So that is possible, but in vanilla Chernarus or Livonia, you're not going to see that frozen food.
But you know, folks, it wasn't all easy riding. There were some bumps and lumps along the road. Now, one of the things that happened, I'm going to let Red talk about this because he's a little bit more versed in it. Red, tell me what happened with vehicles.
With vehicles, so it was from a couple angles. So as we know, they added a new vehicle class to 126, and that was included in Frostline, which was the vanilla boats. And I have a boat mod, as a lot of people know, so I'm pretty familiar with what was needed to do that. I was surprised and excited that they actually did that. But what happened was in the release of that and a bunch of changes they made to the physics engine underneath, it broke all my vehicles. There were changes to the ways that players attach to vehicles, both when they're seated and, for example, in my boat mod, the way that you could stand on the deck while the boat was moving. The methods and the techniques that I used were no longer functional. And so trying to figure out what they did and how they did it and how I could make changes to my mod to make it functional again was extremely challenging for the fact that they moved most of that functionality deep in the compiled game engine where we never get to see. So it was a lot of hit or miss or trying to get hints from the BI developers. And certainly they were very busy with a lot of the other stuff that was going on post release. So that created a lot of challenges for me and my vehicles. I know that there were a number of other changes made that impacted other modders in a way that it was a surprise. And I'll talk about how that was a surprise in a minute.
I understand they're building their own game. They have to concentrate on vanilla, but I would personally like to see them focus on modders a little bit more because they have such a big modding base. Again, you still got to focus on your base game. You still got to make that a stable product. I understand that, but we've seen a few other game companies and games throw a little bit more focus to their modders and pay a little bit more attention. It would be nice to see. I shouldn't just say the DayZ people. It'd be nice to see more companies do that. Um,
I completely agree, and as a modder, you know, that's very close to my heart. But I also know that you almost have to start from day one saying we are going to allow and encourage modding, and we're going to build the base game in a way that it makes that possible and uh, makes it such a way that we're not the company itself is not hemmed in by mods that people make, but also modders don't risk having everything break every time the game gets updated. So again, you have to start from day one. And I think that modding in DayZ evolved and a lot of people learned on their own and it was a lot of guesswork. And so there's a lot of techniques that are used by mods that are not best practice. So that just leads Bohemia back to they need to, like you said, they need to take care of their base vanilla game. That's their number one priority and you know modders are going to have to accommodate for that.
Well, one of the other things I saw and heard about was that they actually, in their efforts to improve the modding tools that we have been given, they accidentally pushed an update that affected a lot of community made maps. And one of the changes they did is they messed with the center of objects, making most of the objects after 1.26 be embedded in the ground or in other objects because the placement was now off because the center of the object had been changed. Another thing I heard is that people were having troubles even just building their maps at all from the changes to the map builder tool. Luckily, DayZ was able to listen to the community after some push and did revert the tools back, allowing map modders to fix it. But I kind of agree with Dimension and a little bit with Red there. It would be nice to see a little bit more transparency in some of this stuff, but at the end of the day, I do understand that it is their game and they have to focus on their base.
Well, speaking of accidental updates, that's part of what I was talking about earlier with the mixed bags of comments on social media platforms. One of the hosting companies pushed 1.26 too early during the streamer event, and it's crashed a lot of servers and at a lot of servers, if not all of the servers, unplayable for a while. And that's a lot of what I was seeing on social media platforms were people complaining not only when that happened, but also later on when 1.26 and Frostline was actually released, and the servers still weren't fully capable or weren't enough to accommodate this massive influx of players that we had.
There was another piece I wanted to add about the way in which 126 was released. So normally there's experimental releases that are put out prior to the stable release that can be used primarily for players to test and give feedback to Bohemia. But also for it's been useful for modders to be able to test your mods against the new experimental build to see if you're going to have to make any adjustments. Unfortunately, with 126, there was a huge gap between the last experimental release and the code base there and the 126 stable release. So we got a big surprise on release day when 126 stable came out, and suddenly there were a lot of mods that didn't work that tested okay with the previous experimental build.
Yeah, and I can definitely see all those kind of situations. And remember, folks, these quick talk about the bumps and lumps in the road when it came to DayZ Frostline and the 1.26, it's just us talking about the things we've seen and heard about on social media and other sites. But remember, folks, at the end of the day, there's someone else on the other side of the screen, whether it be on their Twitter account, their Discord, or even in the comments on their Steam page. Someone has to sit there and read them. And remember, folks, if it's not constructive, it's just you whining. It's not really helping the game other than you being mean and rude to the people who are trying to make this game as best as they can. But moving on from that kind of a situation, I think DayZ Frostline actually was quite a success. And I think it shows, and hopefully shows to the DayZ team and BI, that DayZ isn't done yet. For a 10-year-old plus game to have these kind of numbers, to have this kind of reception, and to keep going. I mean, I think most of the official servers have 30 to 40 plus people playing on them, and most of the official servers for this new map have a 50-player cap. So that tells you a lot about how people still are playing this a month later. Shows that DayZ itself is not done, and I can't wait to see what they do next because this was a massive undertaking, and I hope BI realizes that the money and time that they allowed DayZ to put into this was worth it.
Yeah, I think that the overall opinion of the DLC in 1.26 is turning towards the positive. I think that once the dust is settling and people are calming down and some of these issues are fixed, I think everyone's realizing that some of the issues brought up before are not as big of an issue as they thought. And once they've given Frostline and 1.26 a chance, I think that the positivity is kicking in. I think that with a game as old as DayZ and having players that are veteran players that came in from the beginning or even before DayZ was actually DayZ, I think it's easier because those people have been with the game for this long. I think it's easier to take on a more quote unquote cynical view in the beginning of something new. But I think now that this has had a chance to be here and we've had a chance to experience it, I think it's overall a positive response, and I think it's just going to get better from here.
And as I've said in the past, for console players, this is a huge boon, as this being the first new map that console players have gotten since Livonia was released.
Well, folks, thank you very much for joining us on our episode of DayZ Frostline a month later. Join me in thanking Dimension 119 and Red Falcon for being here and being so supportive of the podcast. Thank you very much for watching State of Survival. Ta-ta for now.
See you in another dimension.
Cheers.